Greetings, gamers. You may be wondering where I've been, or you might not. It doesn't really matter. At this point, I have begun working on Hearts and Souls 2nd Edition and focusing a lot of my time and energy on that when it's not being distracted by normal life. And so I come to you and basically want to ask, what do you want to see in a superhero setting? First edition setting was not really much of anything. I just put ideas down, hoping that people would use them as a launching point and create their own settings. This time around, I'm going to create a set of tools or guidelines, more specifically for helping you build your own world, but I'm going to include a very specific, very detailed example. And in this case, I am taking my hometown, not necessarily ideal because it's very small, only 100,000 people, at least most of the time. It ranges between 90 and 150,000 depending on the oil bust or oil boom, and it is heavily impacted by the economy around it. In fact, the rest of the country is suffering an economy downturn, and my small hometown was booming because of the oil fields and the price of gas. Now, they can say that the price of oil is not directly equated to it, but they're digging up a lot more oil in the U.S. these days, and that means a lot more money in those oil areas, especially in this part of Texas. Now, it does have several small cities around it that vary in size from approximately a tenth or so the size on up to another city that's almost identically numeric in population. So what do I do with a small area that is fairly tight set of related communities and add superheroes when it's not necessarily big enough to support more than one or two minor heroes at best, population-wise, based on a number of theories that people have had? Well, the big one is smash it with a comet and make it bigger when it gets rebuilt. And that's what I'm doing. In 2004, a comet, whose name I don't have handy, but I did look up comet naming instances and use those examples to create my own comet, is broken up above this part of Texas, a little bit south of where I live now, but significantly south that the shards would not impact where I'm living at the moment. And what they do is, despite the cities being evacuated in advance just in case, the shards do come down and do wreak havoc on the local environment and atmosphere. The end result is an artificial lake created by natural phenomena that is maintained partially by the cometary water, the runoff of all the comet shards that impacted the ground, as well as opening up an underground reservoir that was not yet discovered, thanks to everyone focusing on oil. In addition to that, that amount of water flooding into this semi-arid environment changes the weather to make it a little bit more sustainable in the situation of water, especially as dry as the state of Texas has been in the last few decades. And in fact, it's getting worse all the time. So if you don't believe in global warming, go look at places in Texas that used to be huge lakes and rivers that needed bridges to cross, and now you can cross by taking a tiny hop over them. And tell me that there's not something going on with the weather. Anyway, but rebuilding the city, it gets renamed after the heroes who stopped the comet from impacting directly. That is, despite attempts by both the government and other peoples who stopped the comet, it failed up till the point superheroes got involved, and they mostly succeeded. But the cost was the named superheroes of the setting, which in this case, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the name I came up with or add a new one, because ordinarily I would just call them a variety of local idea names, but they don't quite work when you compare them to other superhero names. But these superheroes consist of the Chinese-American acrobat speedster, Tumbleweed, the second-generation hero, power armor suit wearer, Captain Eagle, the leader and former FBI agent and elastic hero, Lariat, the feline and feral heroine known as Carnivora, and lastly the Hispanic mixed race heroine La Roca, which means the rock, at least in some forms of Spanish, but in Spanish after all. Now basically she is the brick, and her and Tumbleweed have the greatest impact at the end of the story. But the cost is La Roca in a coma, and nobody knows when she's coming out. Tumbleweed dying of a heart attack because of straining his teenage abilities to their most of his heart burst, fundamentally. Captain Eagle goes down, taking out the largest chunks of comet in the atmosphere, while Carnivore's shuttle that she was piloting, because she is a scientist and a very skilled pilot, gets taken out in orbit. Lariat, who is believed to be on the shuttle with Carnivora, no body was found. So whether he's alive or dead, nobody knows. But everybody else is dead, which leaves this newly rebuilt city that was named after them, Lone Star City, because they were Lone Star Irregulars, at least at this point, because they're the only team of superheroes in Texas. Now Houston has individual ones, Dallas has individual ones, you know, the small places on the coast have individual heroes, but this was the only team for the entire state of Texas that functioned and stayed together and dealt with things all over the state. And I'm going a little bit more regional than, more along the lines of Marvel, than towards the DC, where you have more global heroes than local heroes, although they are both in both settings. And their villains are still around. Their villains didn't sacrifice themselves, and their villains, when the rebuilt city came back, are even more powerful in terms of influence and politics. Taking what I know of my local region, the amount of corruption, sadly, due to politics and money, along with the variety of new technologies that are brought in after its devastation to help rebuild, along with the fact that it's a new area with a lot of heroism inherent to it that draws people who are idealists to an area, and you put these idealists in with the corrupt, and the fundamental balance creates a bit of schismatic area, a schism between the different identities, and the fundamental common decency and politeness of Texans, at least in my area. Now, don't let me mistake you. I love the people of Odessa, Midland. I'm not saying any of them are particularly corrupt. There is corruption there. I'm not naming any names. It exists. It exists everywhere, but especially when you get these smaller towns that are big enough to deal with some of the problems and industries we deal with, especially extremely wealthy industries like the oil companies. And an individual company working in the oil field may not be all that wealthy, but their ties to more wealthy situations create a lot of influence that otherwise shapes the policy of this area of Texas quite a bit and creates problems. The influx of immigrants to a new city that has promises, were rebuilt from the ashes of the old. We've always had a lot of immigrants, both illegal and legal immigrants from Mexico primarily, and that's going to be an issue in the game setting as well, as there's going to be a lot of illegal immigrants. And how do superheroes deal with somebody who's breaking the law, but they're breaking the law fundamentally to get a better life, to have a place that's safe and healthy and whatever for their children and their children's children and so on. Now, I could go on and on and on about this setting, but this is my idea as it stands. I want your feedback. I want to know what you think, so comment, or wherever you see this, comment on YouTube, whatever, send me an email. My email is easy to find most places. And most of you who are probably watching this know how to contact me in other ways. But I wanted to create a setting that has a different feel. And Marvel Universe, in comics and movies, is fairly New York central. DC has fictional cities all over. And I wanted to hybridize that idea of taking a city I know and the kind of people I know and little elements and touches of the area I have lived in, at least most of my life. Not all my life. I've also lived in Vancouver, Canada, which was quite enjoyable, and a few other places. But the premise is taking that small area, making it larger, and compounding the problems of crime and all of that, so it becomes a necessity that superheroes rise to face that, giving new GMs, those who want to use a setting that's pre-created for an area to play in. Now it has some failings, some issues, because it's not on the coast. It's fairly west central Texas, towards the armpit, so to speak, of Texas, where it touches New Mexico. And that means it's fairly central to both El Paso and Dallas, meaning a large city between those two creates a very interesting balance of congruent elements, both in the nature of people who will come through the town, who will interact with the city, but there isn't an ocean, there isn't a sea, so coastal stories with Atlantean invasions are unlikely to be something that comes up. There are fixes for that. After all, you have a lot of oil industry, and in this setting they're going to be the subterra, which is under earth, which are the cavernous systems that exist networked deep beneath the earth but above the magmasphere, where life forms exist. And there are some things that live in floating nations on top of magma and in the center of the earth. And those things are really not all that happy with all of the noise and confusion created by those who are drilling above them. Now, whether that makes a good adventure for you or not, it will depend on your taste. And again, it will be an example setting set up so player characters can walk into it and be the big heroes. They will be the named big good guys. And if you don't want to use it, I will hopefully have a really good set of tools, guidelines, as I said before, because there's no real mechanical way to make a good city for a particular type of superheroing. I could say here is a good one for 4-color, and here's a good one for not 4-color, or for darker, for more realistic, for TV, for movie, for whatever subdivision you feel flavor and tone and pacing you want. Because comic books are paced slower than movies, and they allow things to happen a little more crazy and wild than most movies, because they have an unlimited effective special effect budget in return to their artists and their writers can use. So it creates very different types of elements that you may want to examine. I'm creating one setting to use. It's going to be somewhat moderate in tone, mostly 4-color, and whether you use it or not, that's up to you. But the end result is that there will also be tools that you can take, run off, and turn your own hometown, or turn some big city you want to use into a superhero setting in this universe, or your own universe. Both will be doable, but I'm going to give more than just the city as part of the setting. There are agencies such as Badge, which is a program to return injured officers in various police affiliates back to work through advanced cybernetics. It stands for Bionically Augmented Department for Greater Enforcement, and they're a subdivision officially of the FBI, although they do also have members who belong to various local police departments kind of on loan, because a normal SWAT officer isn't going to be able to take down a man who can toss tanks. Badge comes as a close sort of average between them and your traditional superheroes. It allows them to, at least keep some of the more terrible things from happening until they have superheroes who can step in. Anyway, that's my idea. Give me feedback. Let me know what's going on. Thank you.